George Richards, who covers the Florida Panthers for FloridaNow.com, also is formerly of The Athletic and formerly of the Miami Herald, FloridaHockeyNow.com. My apologies on that. George, I know us here in Carolina, we're a smaller market team. We often get overlooked, and I know in the first round, the national media was all over the Islanders. In the second round, they're all over the Devils. How much disrespect did you all feel as a franchise facing the Bruins and the Maple Leafs in the first round? We can maybe, even though we're opponents, George, we can still maybe relate in some way, shape, or form.
Well, listen, I mean, the Florida Panthers are in the Miami-Fort Lauderdale market, so it's a big market, but, the Florida Panthers are by no means a big market team. I mean, they're kind of down on the totem pole down here, and, their record over the past 20 years is probably the reason why, but they've definitely picked it up of late, and the last couple of years have been pretty good. Anytime you're taking on, original six teams, it doesn't really matter if you're the Florida Panthers, Carolina Hurricanes, or the Dallas Stars, right? I mean, you're going to be probably going to be the underdog in that, and then they're just bigger markets. I mean, they're just bigger hockey markets. It's just the way it is, and listen, Florida, Carolina have a little bit of history back the old Southeast days, and those were fun times. And I remember going to Raleigh many, many times to cover the Panthers up there. They used to play 8 times a season back then. It was, nuts back in the day, but yeah, it's fun to see Florida and Carolina, especially with all the ties that, the two organizations have.
And there are a lot of ties. George Richards, FloridaHockeyNow.com, joining us here in the Keister Automotive Group hotline. He covers the Florida Panthers. Let's get into those ties. It's still amazing to me that Eric Staal is still in the NHL at his age, and just the way he's been able to revitalize his career, even after leaving Carolina. How vital, a lot of Canes fans may not know, at least newer ones, may not know the impact he had on this organization here because they weren't around, which is totally fine.
Sure.
But what's the impact that he has had as a veteran presence, someone who's won a Stanley Cup?
Yeah, I think, it's immeasurable, the off-the-ice stuff, right? I mean, Eric Staal is 38. He's not the player that he was when he was captain of the Hurricanes, or, 4 years into his career winning the Stanley Cup with the Hurricanes. But there's still flashes of brilliance, and I think that's what you can see Paul Maurice just light up whenever you see those flashes, because Paul saw it, from day one when Eric Staal was drafted. And listen, there's only a couple guys on this Panther team that have been to the Cup Finals, much less won the Cup. Patrick Hornquist isn't playing. He's on long-term injured reserve with a couple concussions. And then you've got Eric, who's won the Cup. And, sometimes guys who have been through the battles, guys who have done it and been through it, they can be a calming influence on players who haven't. And the Panthers are filled with players who have just not been there. This is as far as any of them have been. And they're kind of learning on the fly and seeing what's going on. That's where Carolina, I think, kind of has an edge. They were there in 2019. They've been to the semifinals in the Eastern Conference the past couple years. For Florida, this is pretty much uncharted territory.
Bill Zito, the GMA, George Paul Leihander with you. Follow George Richards at George Richards on Twitter, FloridaHockeyNow.com. This is a team that the Panthers are just a year removed from winning the President's Trophy. So I don't want to underestimate the Florida Panthers at all. Bill Zito's a genius for keeping this team together and putting them in a position and keeping them moving, even though the inexperience that you talk about has kind of given them kind of an up and down season. But they're here now.
Yeah, I mean, you had a lot of people, especially down here, panicking that the Panthers weren't going to make the playoffs, and, trade this guy, trade that guy. We heard reports that Sam Reinhart or Sam Bennett was going to be traded. None of that was true. If the Panthers didn't make the playoffs this year, they are looking ahead. The whole reason they traded for Matthew Tkachuk was for the future, not necessarily this season. they were never going to panic. And honestly, the only deal that may have been made at the deadline for Florida, maybe they would have traded defenseman Radko Gudas.
Mm-hmm.
What were they going to get for him? A third-round pick, a fourth-round pick? For a team that was challenging for a playoff spot, you cannot tell the room, well, we helped ourselves by trading one of your veteran players for a fourth-round pick in 2025. That don't fly. They kept the team together. They made their way into the playoffs. They got hot at the right time. They won 6 straight games at the end of the year. Pittsburgh definitely helped them out. But this team is built for the future. I mean, you've got everybody on this team of importance is signed for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So, yeah, I mean, Bill Zito, give him all the credit because he totally retooled, revamped this roster. When he took over in 2020, there's only 3 players left. 4 if you count Eetu Luostarinen, who hadn't played for the Panthers yet. So, yeah, he changed over this franchise in a big way, and they're feeding off the results now.
Luostarinen, former Carolina Hurricane prospect, actually played a few games up here with the Carolina Hurricanes. It's amazing, George, that the 2 teams in the Eastern Conference Final are the ones who made the least amount of moves at the trade deadline. You talk about teams built for the future and not giving up, current players on the roster for future assets or trading future assets for right now. The 2 teams that didn't make a lot of moves are the ones that are still in it.
Yeah, and the Panthers would have loved to make moves. Let's not kid ourselves. They would have loved to make some moves. Carolina probably would have as well. Florida didn't have any draft capital to trade, number one, and even if they did, they didn't have any cap space to do anything with. So, they kept things as it was. Like you said, last year this team won the President's Trophy, and they went all in, right? Florida were the headliners of the 2022 NHL trade deadline. They got Claude Giroux. They got Ben Sherratt. They traded, for a couple other guys. I mean, they went all in, and it didn't work out in the playoffs. And this year they just didn't have that kind of capital to deal with. And they just said, hey, we like our team. We'll see what happens. We'll see if they make the playoffs. If they don't, we'll move on. If they do, let them run. And that's what they did. Now, Carolina made a couple little moves before the deadline, and it's worked out there too. So sometimes going all in doesn't work, but I think when you're in that position, you kind of got to go for it.
George Richards, give him a follow on Twitter at George Richards. Thanks for the insight on the Florida Panthers, and we'll see you up here in Raleigh.
All right. Sounds good. We'll see you.